Well, for more on the Pope's legacy, I'm joined now in the studio by Reverend Father Barkindo, who is a Catholic priest of the Diocese of Yola in Adamawa State, Executive Director of the Kuka Center, and Secretary of the National Peace Committee. Also with me is Bishop Stephen Adegbite, Executive Secretary of the Nigerian Christian Pilgrim Commission. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us on the news tonight.
Thank you, Adis.
We do appreciate your time. Let me begin with you, Father. Our hearts do go out to the Catholic community, particularly here in Nigeria at a time like this. But what went through your mind when you first heard the news about the Pope being dead as announced by the Vatican, particularly because a lot of people, I mean, the world saw him yesterday.
Yeah, I was shocked really when I woke up this morning and I got the news. But my first reaction is to his immediate family, if there's any surviving member at all, really to pray for them, and to the entire Catholic community and the Christian community across the world. And I think literally to the whole of humanity, because the Pope represents a moral compass, particularly for a global community where ethical leadership is really badly needed. And he spoke really when he was alive on very serious issues that I think that has given direction and some kind of hope to the entire human family. So that was my first reaction. But that is life, you know. And for me, the Irish people will say that when you share your sorrows, the sorrows reduce. So when you have 1.4 million Catholics, billion Catholics, and you are sharing that kind of sorrow with them, I think it's much more comforting knowing what the Pope actually represented.
All right, let me come to you, sir, Mr. Adegbite. In your statement reacting to the demise of the Pope, you said the Pope lived a life of humanity, love, and humility. So this is not just the leader of 1.4 billion Catholics around the world, but a global icon. Tell us, what did you make of the life of Pope Francis?
Pope Francis is an enigma who lived a well-fulfilled life and whose legacy we cannot forget in a hurry. I had one-on-one contact with him about 2 times. I was in Rome in 2022. I was in Rome last year. And in 2 occasions, I participated in the Papa's audience. And he sat me with the cardinals. And after the Papa's audience, we had opportunity to have photograph with him. And when I got to him, he prayed for Nigeria. He prayed for Africa. And he prayed for me personally. And he gave me a gift. So I cannot forget a man like that, who is not only for the Roman Catholic Church, but for the world. And taking after St. Francis of Assisi is a great thing. Taking into poverty and reducing himself to ordinary human being like any other person. Going to the prisoner, washing their feet, kissing their feet, is a great legacy. And it's a lesson to every one of us that our life has nothing in it. He was there yesterday, this morning, he's gone. What a way to exit the world. Dying on Easter Monday.
A very significant day.
Significant day in the history of the church. The climax of Christianity is Easter. Without Easter, there is no message. And that is why we are celebrating him today.
Indeed. Father Barkindo, I'll come back to legacy, Mr. Adegbite, but Father Barkindo, let's talk about your perspective of Pope Francis' legacy when it comes to Africa and Nigeria in particular. He spoke a lot about the insecurity, spoke about the poor several times. He's visited the continent. But what part of his legacy really resonates with Africa that we can be a part of? Was it his physical presence? Was it his advocacy for the poor? Or his efforts at reconciliation and peace?
I think it was everything, really, in my opinion. But the most important thing is it resonated in his encyclical Laudato Si, the attention he called to the environment, asking that the earth is our common home, asking us to take care of the earth and to take care of the environment. And you can't do that if there's no reconciliation. You can't do that if there's no security. You can't do that if you don't come together to end insecurity. And I think that for me is one of the biggest legacies you will see. If you look at Nigeria, for example, look at the level of undocumented internal migration. People are moving, looking for greener pasture within the country because there's complete, environmental devastation and this, degradation. But apart from that, one of the things he has done so well in the church, in my opinion, is bringing the voices of people who are marginalized, who are literally ungotten and even unknown, living on the margins of society. And if you check out the number of cardinals he has appointed from far away aspects of the church, away from Europe, people who have not been heard before, bringing them to the center, to the decision-making process of the Catholic Church. I think for me, these are two critical elements, the aspect of the environment and the aspect of bringing the voices of those who are living on the fringe to matter.
Bishop Adegbite, you talked about lessons that we can learn from him, and I'm very particular about that, but let's still keep that aside and dwell on his legacies. He broke many grounds, particularly in the interfaith dialogue, even visiting Iraq, signing historic accords with Islamic leaders. We've never seen that before. Has that had any impact, in your own opinion? Has it had any impact, for instance, in a country like Nigeria, where we have different faiths living together?
Definitely, because I belong to the national body of NIREC, Interfaith, where you have the likes of the Sultan of Sokoto, which can president, and other Christian, about 30 of us. We meet every quarter.
Yeah.
We're having another meeting next week in Imo State. And you can see what he has done to ensure that we live in peace. And it's only when you have peace that you talk of progress. And that is why some of us admire his style very well. And that is why we will stand for that until we also leave the earth. Because there is no reason for us to be fighting. And when you have people like that, and you see what they are doing with sincerity, not just say what I do, and not what I say, but not what I do, but is living the world. And that is why, for me, is somebody that we should look up to, and we should take from what he has done to humanity. And if we don't do that as a nation, where are we going to end? And that is why we go into a lot of things. The two books, the holy books, don't fight. The Quran and the Bible. It's only those of us who are practicing it that will bring unnecessary problem to ourselves, interpretation. And we should concentrate on our area of convergence more than our area of divergence. And when you study the two books properly, I study comparative religion, there is no reason for you to fight. When you take the Lord's Prayer, you take the Fatiha, then you will see the similarities and the reason why you should hold on to your own faith. Allow me to hold on to my own. And one day when we get to God, God will decide who is his own. And of course, if you learn from the lesson that Jesus gave to the people, who is my neighbor? And he gave a narrative. Somebody moving from Jerusalem to Jericho, attacked by robbers. Religious leaders don't even look at him. But somebody came from Samaria. He assisted him. And he said, who is the neighbor of the victim? Of course, the man that assisted. Go and do likewise. That is what Pope have done. To go to where it's not expected. And to make peace. And it says to us in Romans chapter 12, verse 18, as much as is lying within you, live in peace with all men. That is the lesson we must learn from the life of Pope.
Indeed. Father Barkindo, do you agree the impact of these moves or the actions by late Pope Francis in bringing together interfaith, Christians, Muslims, traveling to Iraq, what impact has that had in Nigeria? If any?
It has a lot, to be honest. The Pope himself is not the president of Nigeria or of Iraq. He's not a high-level policymaker in those countries. But the impacts will be at two levels. At the first level, he has become a very powerful reference point and a moral compass that can guide people. And I think for me, this is really very important. At the second level is that he has challenged political leaders who are taking decisions. Because when political leaders are used to unaccountable form of leadership, and there is no moral voice globally to challenge them, it becomes really a problem. And I think this is where the Pope has actually, stepped in. And the impact it may be very difficult to see, but with time it will be seen. Because apart from what the Pope himself has said, there are lots of structural issues, either in Nigeria or in Iraq, that we are really struggling, to overcome. And I was not surprised with the reaction of our president, Tinubu, what he has said about the Pope and his leadership, and what he has meant, not just to Nigerians and to Catholics, but to the world globally. And I think voices like that of Pope Francis will be constantly needed, particularly in countries where ordinary people are suppressed. They can't express their views. You need higher voices like that of the Pope to speak on behalf of the voiceless. And I think for me that has really been very impactful. And you have to remember that these things are documented. They are going to be referred to in history, either by students, by scholars, by academicians globally. And I think that impact will remain very powerful.
As a human, he also had his shortcomings. I mean, he was a reformist, and some said, that pits him right against, the conservatives of the Catholic Church. He was very progressive when it came to the LGBTQ, the environment which you touched on earlier, appointing a woman. For the very first time, he appointed a woman to lead a Vatican department. Never been done. But many saw these reforms, like I said, as a bridge between conservatives and the liberals in the Catholic Church. Are there lessons there? Father Barkindo, let me ask you this, because this is your constituent, if you allow me. Was he successful in bridging that gap between the conservative and the liberals? Or do you think, this will continue to shadow his beautiful life that everybody has talked about today?
Within the church, whichever popes comes up, like when he took over his own papacy, there's always going to be what we call consistency, but at the same time there'll be change. Because you have to understand the broader global context, how the world is changing, human civilization is changing. And I think this is what Pope Francis himself actually tried to bring in. In fact, one of the controversial statements that people claim he made is, who am I to judge? But that is absolutely not a new statement. What he's asking is that we can't judge, it's only God that is allowed to judge. So I think that he has tried to make those changes in the way and manner he has experienced and served the people in Argentina, particularly the poor, the marginalized, the vulnerable, the most excluded. And he has tried to bring all these voices together within the church. To what extent has he succeeded? And I think that for me, the success, it comes to a level of how much people have embraced the Pope and how much people have heard about him. And the calls for these changes will actually not stop. And that will be now the challenge, not just before the church, but before the new Pope.
We'll talk about who should be the next Pope, the qualities he should bring to the table. But Bishop Adegbite, is the church open for reforms such as the ones being preached and pushed by late Pope Francis?
Oh, definitely. The church is not static. The church will continue to change. It's dynamic. And there is no church that you have a setting that is just there. There must be changes. Yes, human beings don't want changes. Human beings want to remain where they are, whether in the church or in the society. And that is a problem we have all over the world. Everybody wants to just go the straitjacket way, but that is not life. You must allow for objective criticism, and you must also allow for superior arguments. And the moment you say that, why can you not let go? And that is why when you go into dialogue, it's give and take. So for us and for the world, we must expect changes from time to time. And that is the only way for you to move forward. And
finally, let's talk about those lessons before I let you go very quickly. Pope Francis was a man of many firsts, even in death. He has decided to be the first in centuries to be buried outside of St. Peter's Basilica. It's not happened in many centuries. He will also be buried in a simple casket made of wood. Do these choices reflect his humility? And beyond that, the lesson for religious leaders beyond the papacy, across faiths, about leading with service and not thrones of power.
That is why I'm happy that Pope died on a day like this, taken after the Lord Jesus Christ, because it's after resurrection, appearance to a lot of people. Jesus came and he died for the vulnerables, a selfless life. And everything Jesus used were borrowed. The place of birth borrowed.
In a manger?
In the manger. When he wanted to have the Last Supper with the disciple, borrowed. The upper room. Even the tomb used was borrowed. And you can imagine the life of Pope. Where he's supposed to live, luxurious place for him. He said, no, I don't want that. Give me something simple. And for him to be buried outside the Vatican, when I got the news, I said, wow. And what is in life really? We came with nothing. We are going with nothing.
Vanity. Father Barkindo, are we likely to see the next Pope continue in this liberal reforms? And I mean, when you see religious leaders in their ostentatious lifestyle, it has raised criticism. That's contrary to what Pope Francis stood for. He was a Pope of the people, Pope of the poor. How can religious leaders and leaders across the board begin to see their seats not as thrones of power, but leading with service, really?
I think I can't dictate to individual religious leaders and how they lead their churches and what they want, but just to refer to where the Pope wanted to be buried, for example.
Yeah.
Actually, there's a whole 1,000-year tradition of protocols of pairing popes. And he made the revision of that protocol almost last year before, probably he hoped that something like that was going to happen. And he wanted not to be seen as a career pope with all this ostentation and the stripes of power that surround some of the perceptions that people have regarding the Vatican, but to have a very simple funeral rite, seen as simply a servant of God and a servant of the people. And I think we hope that this is the type of thing that the new Pope will bring. Not just a sense of service to humanity and to God, not just a sense of humility, but a Pope that has the capacity to communicate that to the world, both in word and in action.
We have to go, but are we likely to see an African Pope?
That is not for me to decide, it's for the Holy Spirit.
Bishop, an African Pope?
I hope to see one.
Great. A fine place to leave it. Thank you so much. Reverend Father Barkindo is the Catholic priest of the Diocese of Yola in Adamawa State. He's also the Executive Director of the Kuka Center and Secretary of the National Peace Committee. He was joined tonight on the news by Bishop Stephen Adegbite, who is the Executive Secretary of the Nigerian Christian Pilgrim Commission. Once again, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
On the news.